I didn't lie on my resume because I was careless or greedy. I lied because I was tired of being invisible. Every job posting demanded experience I didn't have but somehow expected me to magically gain it. Without being given a chance, I stared at my resume for hours, knowing it was honest but also knowing honesty had gotten me nowhere. The lie wasn't dramatic, just a small exaggeration. A skill I had used once instead of mastered. A responsibility I had assisted with instead of led. I told myself it was harmless, that I could learn quickly if given the opportunity. Still, my hands shook when I clicked submit, knowing I had crossed a line I could never uncross. When the interview invitation arrived, my first reaction wasn't excitement, it was fear. I reread my resume and felt like I was looking at someone else's life. During the interview, every question felt like a trap waiting to expose me. I answered carefully, choosing words that danced around the truth without fully lying again. The interviewer nodded, impressed, asking follow-up questions that made my chest tighten. Somehow, I survived. When they smiled and said they'd be in touch, I walked out convinced I'd never hear from them again. Part of me hoped I wouldn't. The job offer came 2 days later. I stared at the email until the words blurred. I had expected relief, but instead guilt hit first. I had beaten the system, but at what cost? Accepting the offer felt like signing a contract with my anxiety. I told myself I would work twice as hard, learn everything fast, and prove that the lie didn't define my ability. I accepted the job, promising myself that I would become the person my resume claimed. I already was. The first week was brutal. Every task felt like walking on thin ice. I Googled constantly, stayed late, and took notes like my life depended on it. I was terrified of being exposed, of someone realizing I didn't belong there. But something unexpected happened. I wasn't failing. I was learning. Slowly. Painfully, but genuinely. The skills I had exaggerated began to feel real through repetition. Confidence didn't arrive suddenly, but competence did. By the end of the first month, the fear softened. I still remembered the lie, but it no longer controlled me. I realized something uncomfortable. The job wasn't impossible. It had just been inaccessible. I hadn't stolen the role from someone better. I had stepped into a space I was capable of growing into. The lie got me through the door, but effort kept me inside. And that realization stayed with me longer than the guilt ever did. As weeks passed, I began noticing how differently I carried myself at work. At first, I spoke less, listened more, afraid that saying too much would reveal what I didn't know. But slowly, as tasks repeated and patterns emerged, I started contributing with more confidence. I realized that many of my coworkers were also figuring things out as they went. They weren't experts either. They were just less afraid of making mistakes. That realization was both comforting and unsettling. I had built this idea that everyone else belonged, and I was the only imposter. But the truth was far more human. Everyone was learning, just at different speeds and with different levels of honesty about it. Still, the fear never fully disappeared. Every performance review felt like a potential ending. When my manager scheduled one-on-one meetings, my stomach tightened automatically. I replayed scenarios where the lie would finally surface, where I'd be confronted and dismissed. Instead, those meetings focused on progress, goals, and areas to improve. Hearing constructive feedback instead of suspicion slowly rewired my thinking. I wasn't being tolerated. I was being developed. That shift forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. Maybe I deserved this role more than I had allowed myself to believe. One day my manager praised my progress, not the resume version of me, the real one. That moment hit harder than any compliment I'd ever received. It meant the effort was visible. The hours after work, the quiet studying, the mistakes corrected in private, they mattered. I started to believe that maybe the lie wasn't the core of my story anymore. Maybe growth was. Still, I never forgot how easily everything could fall apart. If the truth surfaced, The anxiety didn't disappear, but it evolved. Instead of fearing exposure, I feared stagnation. I didn't want the lie to be the peak of my ambition. I pushed myself to become genuinely skilled, not just passable. I volunteered for tasks that scared me. I failed quietly and learned loudly. Slowly, the gap between who I was and who I claimed to be closed. That gap had once kept me awake at night. Now it motivated me months later. When a new hire joined with the same uncertainty I once had, I recognized the look instantly. I didn't judge them. I helped them. I remembered how impossible the entry barrier had felt and how desperate I'd been for a chance. That was when I realized something important. The real problem wasn't that I lied. It was that the system left no room for honesty. Unless you already had privilege or experience, there were nights when guilt returned unexpectedly. I'd think about the version of me that sent that resume, hoping no one would look too closely. I wondered if honesty would have led me here eventually, or if I'd still be waiting for a chance that never came. Those thoughts didn't have answers, only tension. But each morning, I showed up and worked, using action to quiet the doubts I couldn't solve. The turning point came when I was asked to lead a small task on my own. My first instinct was panic. Leadership meant visibility, and visibility meant risk. Still, I said yes. I prepared obsessively, asked for feedback, and double-checked everything. The task wasn't perfect, but it was successful. When it ended, no one questioned my background. They only cared that the job was done. That was when I realized something uncomfortable but freeing. The lie was no longer relevant. The work I was doing now mattered more than the words I had written months ago. My resume had described potential, not proof. Now I was slowly turning that potential into reality. The fear of being found out was being replaced by a quieter pressure to keep becoming better than the version of myself that needed to lie to get here. As my responsibilities grew, I noticed a strange shift inside me. The job that once felt borrowed started to feel earned. I no longer counted days hoping no one would notice my weaknesses. Instead, I tracked progress, things I could now do confidently that once terrified me. The lie on my resume began to feel like a distant version of me. Someone desperate and unsure. Someone I understood but no longer fully recognized. Still, there were moments when honesty tempted me. During casual conversations about career paths, I sometimes paused before answering, carefully choosing how much truth to reveal. I wasn't proud of hiding, but I also wasn't ready to risk everything for a moral moment that might change nothing. I learned that ethics in real life aren't always clean or dramatic. Sometimes they live in gray spaces, where survival